If you love to travel, you are going to need a travel agent. And if you want the best travel agent, you are going to need Boullies Travel. Boullies Travel can help you with any kind of holiday wherever you want to go in the world, taking care of every last detail. From package holidays through to fully customized itineraries where you are completely in control of where you go and what you do. And the best part, there are no charges whatsoever. Rated excellent on Trustpilot. Start your next adventure right now by going to bouliestravel.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Jason Boull Travel Podcast. And if this is the first one that you've followed and seen, then make sure you catch up on the existing episodes where we are looking at everything travel based. So we look at different suppliers, we look at different areas, different regions, and we're going to give a really good deep dive and overview of everything you need to know if you're planning to go somewhere. Today we are going to be the first in a little mini series of looking at Japan in some good detail. And I'm joined here today with Charlie Orr of Inside Travel Group. Hello Charlie, how you doing?
Hello, I'm really well. Thank you so much for having me, Jason.
Excellent. Oh, you're more than welcome, buddy. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what it is you know, because I know you know an awful lot. We've had lots of conversations in the past, and every time there's just so much valuable stuff that just keeps coming out, and you give such nuggets of information. So I know that this little mini series is going to be really informative for everybody. So let's just kind of jump in and understand a little bit about you and your history.
Fab. So, where to begin really? So, largely it's been very much intertwined with Japan. Japan as a destination, Japan as a country, its culture, it's everything around it. Is coming up to about 20 years now, I've been kind of like obsessed with this country. I first went when I was 18. I believe I just turned 18. And I went on a solo 2-month backpacking tour all across the country. So I started off in Tokyo, and 20 years ago we didn't have the internet on our phones, so I just had a copy of the Lonely Planet Japan edition, a pocket full of yen and some rail tickets, essentially, to kind of get me around. And I made my way from Tokyo, which is where I started, all the way through to the north of the country, right up to the very top of the northern island of Hokkaido, so very far north, and then worked my way back down south, stopping off at all the major hubs, some really interesting places, getting off the beaten path quite a fair amount, to the southern tip of Kyushu, which is the southern island, as part of the main four. And that was about 20 years ago now, and since then I've just been obsessed. Japan's became one of those places that I was always now in like 2 states. So I was either in Japan, experiencing all the wonders that it has to provide, or I was planning my next trip. And thankfully, there's been quite a few in the meantime. So after university, then I was able to spend 3 years living over in one of the other smaller islands of Shikoku while I was working in a high school. And then when I came back, instantly wanted to return back to Japan. So I did my master's in Japanese studies, which included a brief stint at Kyushu University. So really happy to have studied there as well. And then in my current role as business development manager with Inside Travel Group, I've been able to get back in a kind of a working format as well. So obviously introducing as many people as possible to all of the incredible things that I was really lucky enough to experience, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a dream come true, doesn't it, really? You want to get around Japan and you've done it all by the sounds of it.
With Japan, there's always something new to discover, which I think is just the endless kind of enchanting nature of the country. But from my own experience of living somewhere pretty rural, it was I was living in a city called Kochi, which is in the south of Shikoku. I was just surrounded by valleys and rivers, and at the weekend then I would go like waterfall hunting, and then coming back to the city and then trying the most amazing fish called katsuo tataki. But in my other other visits and other experiences, going off to the larger cities, kind of meeting a Maiko, an apprentice geisha, trying lots of different food all across the place, including fugu as well, which is Japanese, blowfish, essentially, which, if prepared incorrectly, is highly poisonous.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the chef had a bit of sense of humour and decided to put a little bit of chili in the fugu, just so that you've kind of got that sort of kind of tweak taste as you're eating it. So thinking, oh, has he slipped up? Is this the end? But there's just so many different parts of Japan that's still left to explore. I mean, I was there on my most recent trip about 2 months ago, and even during that trip, there were things that I was able to kind of see and experience that I hadn't before. Because, I mean, especially the larger cities that are always changing and everything, and loads of new things becoming kind of in vogue almost. So there's always something to check in on.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's something you have to go back multiple times, don't you, and redo it by the sounds of it.
Absolutely. I think something that always struck me, even from my first visit to Japan, is the many characters that Japan and the people of Japan kind of have, essentially. So kind of if you kind of watch a travel documentary, if you see a Japanese drama or a film about Tokyo, then you might be forgiven in thinking that this is the world of the future. This is kind of where we're headed in terms of the latest gadgets, kind of walking across Shibuya and just seeing the neon lights and just the energy of the city. But then when you go in the countryside, you get a completely different side of things. And actually the school that I used to work in, the computer that I had, and this was only 10 years ago, had a floppy disk drive. And I didn't use it, but my colleagues, the teachers at the school, still utilised floppy disks. And I'm not sure if many of your listeners will remember floppy disks at all.
Do.
But, they were quite limited in terms of storage capabilities, so they're really just sort of storing lesson plans and things. But it was really interesting to see kind of those boxes that had those kind of floppy disk containers
runs of disks
that they were sort of taking around from lesson to lesson and using on a daily basis. And actually, a lot of the ryokans, the traditional inns that we work with at Inside Travel, they only take bookings via fax machine.
Wow.
So it's really interesting to see kind of the latest tech in the larger cities like Tokyo and Osaka, and then just this kind of going backwards in time almost to kind of I guess the late 80s, early 90s in terms of technology. So those are just kind of two examples, but if you go to kind of small places by the sea or in the mountains or kind of the cities in the north or even Okinawa in the very far south, then there's just so many different characters that the country has, and it's great to see them all, see them as many as you can, really, because they're all absolutely phenomenal to experience firsthand.
So how do you think that your living there has really helped shape how you help people see the country today?
That's a really good question. Largely in Japanese society, people are kind of brought up to have two ways of acting, which you can also see in the West in a way, but it's a very defined as part of Japanese character. And there's essentially a forward-facing character that you would kind of present to the world. So if you're working in hospitality or a shop or something like that, then you would have this very sort of particular way of acting. So if you go into a restaurant, then everyone's hospitality is king. And that's the sort of then if you essentially have a different way almost of acting when you're around close friends or family, and that's the side that you kind of keep more reserved. And I think from my experience being able to kind of work in the Japanese school and meeting my colleagues, especially for kind of drinks after work or at a party or something like that, then you sort of see that sort of hospitality kind of face kind of slip a little bit, and you see another side of people which is much more refreshing, much more honest, and much more open. And these are the kinds of experiences that I would love people to have when they go to Japan. So actually engaging with kind of shopkeepers or kind of restaurant owners, or having conversations with people on the bus or on the bullet train, and sort of finding out more about them and their lives, and how it's not exactly how you might see in a Japanese film or Japanese music or anything like that. It's actually a much realer example of people going about their day-to-day lives. And I think it's those engagements, those kind of slices of everyday local life, that I think creates the memories when you're traveling that last forever, essentially. So it's those engagements. And I think that was what was truly special for me. It was, although the destination, although the kind of what you can see and what you can do there is incredible, but it's the people and actually having the chance to engage with those people. And with Inside Travel, there's so many people, so many of my colleagues here that have extremely similar backstories to myself, and that's what we want to bring essentially to people visiting Japan.
Yeah, excellent. So we're going to be focusing today on first-timers, people who haven't been before, they've been thinking about it, they've been planning it a lot, and we're going to help them to understand what they need to do, where they need to begin, and how to get the most out of a first-time journey. Because as you've said, there is so much to go and see and do across Japan. You could probably spend years out there, as indeed you have, and just see it all. So to keep it focused, we're going to look at our first-time destinations. Obviously, Japan is a massive bucket list destination, a big dream trip. Kind of, why do you think it has that kind of like mythical status for first-time travellers?
That's a really good question. I think it's kind of with Japan in mind, it's kind of attracted visitors for, I would say, probably coming up to kind of like in kind of a mass appeal way, probably about 50, 60 years or so. So in the 60s and the 70s, then Japan kind of experienced this huge kind of economic boom. It was huge, and it became fully cemented as this incredible destination. You might remember from the James Bond film that was set there, and that was just like at its peak of this kind of economic boom, where like all of the tech, so all of the VCRs and the televisions, were all from Japan at that point, and it sort of like created this almost otherworldly destination. Like, especially if you're coming from the UK, whereas you can't get any further away from the UK without starting to come back. So it was right on the other side of the world. And it was the differences, but it was also, I think, the similarities that makes it so accessible as a destination and so enchanting. Because when you first arrive, and chances are when you first arrive, you'll be landing in Tokyo. And so that's actually kind of the start and end point for most people. So landing into Tokyo, and sort of if you go into the heart of the city, leaving the airport, then you'll see the bright lights, you'll see the neon, you'll see these huge skyscrapers. If you have the chance while in Tokyo to go to on the Tokyo Skytree, which is this really tall tower right in the middle of the city, you can see how kind of expansive the city is as well. And you might think that because of this large kind of Asian city, you might feel overwhelmed. And actually, that's a very kind of, for most people, that's a really fleeting feeling. And so after about a day, then there's so many things that make sense, because logic is just king, essentially. Logic is king in Japan, where things do make sense. So kind of going on the underground, like the rail system in Tokyo. If you've been on any other underground system in the world, you'll know how to do it in Tokyo. It sort of makes sense. Like, the maps are really good, the directions are really good. There's places that you can line up on the platform so that people are able to get out in an easy way, and then you can board it also in a really easy way. So actually, as overwhelming as it might look on the surface level, it's incredibly accessible, especially as a travel destination. So I think that's what's really enticing for most people, just sort of kind of getting there and being kind of somewhere so different from the UK. But actually, after a short period of time, there's so many similarities. So you feel kind of almost quite comfortable quite quickly experiencing all of these amazing things, essentially, yeah. I would say.
Awesome. So it's not like London in the tube when there's just a whole platform full of people and they're all trying to get on at the same time everyone's trying to get off.
I would say there's if there's similarities for sure, especially if you're going during rush hour in Tokyo. So I mean, for most people that are visiting, they're able to avoid rush hour, but I've done it myself a few times in the city. And in the most extreme stations in Tokyo, they do have station attendants that are employed with immaculate white gloves to gently encourage people to squeeze on as much as possible. I've seen that, but I haven't experienced it myself, because I do try and avoid rush hour wherever possible. But there's order in the chaos. I'd say there's absolute order. So instead of people being aggressive and pushing and sort of people pulling off, everyone sort of files in, files out, and the number of people might be the same as in London, but the order is vastly different.
I just love the image of somebody being pushed onto a train as the door closes.
Delicately. Yeah, just
gently, nicely.
Encouraged.
I love that.
Physically encouraged.
What are the biggest misconceptions that first-time travellers tend to have about Japan?
I would say probably the language is one where I think there's a misconception that, especially in the larger cities, that you'll struggle to get by if you only speak English. And I'd say from my own perspective, that's largely untrue. So when I first went 20 years ago, I could maybe say hello, and I could say a laboured thank you. And to be honest, I didn't really learn much more than that, apart from the name of the occasional delicacy or food that I wanted to eat. And I was there for 2 months, and I was able to get all across the country, right into the countryside and nooks and crannies. What I found is in the larger cities, the level of English was actually pretty good, and that was 20 years ago. And in the countryside, while the level of English was probably lower, I felt like the desire to help was higher. So I was in the middle of a very small town, a little bit lost at one point, and I was looking for the station, and I went into a shop and eventually got my point across that I was looking for the station. And the person behind the counter didn't speak any English, but he did have some chalk. So he took me outside of his shop, and then on the pavement he drew a map of where we were, where the station was, and the route that I would have to take. So it was that level of care that I really loved. I mean, since then, 20 years have gone by. They've had the Rugby World Cup, they've had the Olympics, and they've had a number of people like myself kind of working in Japanese school to practice conversation with students over the decades. And actually the level of English has really improved quite a fair amount as well. So if you go to Japan without any Japanese at all, then you will be able to navigate just fine. And the people are so willing to help along the way. So I think that's a bit of a sticking point where people just be like, I don't know, I don't really speak any, I don't speak any Japanese, and I don't know how I'd get around. And actually kind of navigating, especially around the stations, like everything is in English in terms of the stations. There's loads of restaurants that have English menus now, and it just feels great. Even if you're traveling as a family, even a younger family, then actually getting around is just one of the easiest destinations to navigate, largely because of the language being more accessible now, but also just the comfort of public transport. I mean, you would never think that sort of getting a train from one city to another would be an attraction or an experience in itself, but actually riding the bullet train in Japan it's incredible. I'm never going to get tired of it. I mean, I was able to ride it a few times a couple of months ago, and it took me back to the first time that I rode it, and it's fantastic.
Amazing, sounds it. So when planning your first trip, and we're going to now move on to kind of, where people begin and how they get started. So when you're planning the first trip, what are the must-see cities or regions you recommend as a starting point?
I think as a starting point, so there's obviously so much to see and do across the entire country of Japan. And I think for first-time visitors, then the majority will stick to the main island, which is the island of Honshu. And on Honshu, then you've got kind of the larger cities and city names that most people might recognize. So places like Tokyo, for example, and Kyoto, Osaka as well, Hiroshima. So all of these will probably feature in some capacity in a first trip. In terms of length of time, I think is really important to kind of stress in terms of what would be comfortable. And I would recommend around 2 weeks for a first-time visit. That allows you, I mean, because if you're traveling from the UK, it is quite far away. It is the other side of the world. And if you're flying direct from London, then you might be looking at around a 14-hour travel time. So to do anything less than 2 weeks, I think is a bit of a shame. I think you've kind of got your stride in Japan, and then it's sort of time to come home and you realise there was more to see and do. But Tokyo, I think, has to be a bit of a must for first-time visitors, largely because that is the predominant place where people will land and also depart from. And it's so worth your time as well. I mean, Tokyo doesn't really feel like one city. It feels like a collection of towns and villages all squished together. And there's so many different regions within the capital to explore. I mean, two that I really wanted to kind of highlight is Asakusa, which is a great kind of landing point for the first few nights if you're first time in Japan, because Asakusa's there's so many things to kind of see attraction-wise. There's like the Etiquette Shrine, which is phenomenal, but there's so many places within walking distance, as well as a wide variety of different styles of hotel and food options as well. So if you're traveling as a family or a solo traveler, or going maybe with your loved ones or your friends, then actually sort of finding something that would suit everybody in your first few days and sort of having that kind of buffer is great. And it's a bit quieter, I would say, than some of the more built-up areas of Tokyo. But then when you're returning back, then it's time to kind of, take off, put the bells and whistles on, and maybe have your final night in somewhere like Shinjuku or Shibuya, which is kind of right in the centre. And that's where you actually find the famous Shibuya crossing, of course, where you've got thousands of people all crossing at once in very orderly fashion, and then suddenly it's clear for the traffic to come by, which is really cool. So actually having a final night in Tokyo allows you to see two different sides of this incredible city, but there's so many more sides to explore, of course. Kyoto as well, and Kyoto's a tricky one, because I think that's going to be pretty high up there in terms of what people would like to see and do in their first visit, and that's to see the old capital. And that's where you sort of see kind of the more historical side of Japan, as opposed to kind of Tokyo's kind of futuristic elements. I say it's tricky largely just because over the last 15, 20 years or so, Kyoto has suffered quite dramatically from over-tourism because it is such a popular destination. So I think in terms of sort of being in that city, it's good to have a bit of a game plan. And that's sort of not try and do everything, because there's thousands of temples and shrines in that city alone. So to see everything, one, it's impossible. And two, you're likely to suffer kind of burnout pretty quickly if you attempt it. So it's really sort of looking into what you want to get from Kyoto as a city. So if you want to meet an apprentice geisha, that could be done. If you want to go and see a few temples and shrines, absolutely. And sort of break things down by regions within the old capital, and then sort of planning your days accordingly, I think is probably the best way to tackle things like that. But with temples and shrines, which is what Kyoto is famous for, then actually there's lots of alternatives. I mean, if you think about the Japanese Alps, there's like Takayama and Kanazawa, and Kanazawa itself has an old samurai district as well as a geisha district, similar to the Gion area in Kyoto. So actually there's other places to kind of get that kind of old worldy style of things with fewer crowds and fewer people. So as avoiding the crowds as well. So is something that I would really highlight, sort of move people away from Kyoto as much as possible, and sort of if you are there, then maximising your time in the game plan. And other places that immediately come to mind as well is Hiroshima. So Hiroshima obviously has a very tragic recent past as well, and seeing that side of Japan and understanding that element of history, I think is really important for a first-time visitor, to go and see kind of where the atomic bomb dropped essentially, and go to the Peace Park, and then also see the A-bomb dome, which is one of the few remaining structures in the city which is still standing in part of the park, is a really important element. But on top of that, Hiroshima now is also a very cosmopolitan city with incredible restaurants, dining opportunities, these huge boulevards to stroll across, and it's only a kind of a hop, skip and a jump to Miyajima, which is the island just off the coast of Hiroshima, which has the floating red torii gate coming out of the water, which is miraculous, and just it works really well as a first time. Another couple of other options as well. So I would say Osaka, and I'm not being hopefully too biased, but I mean Osaka was the largest city to where I used to live. So it was only about a couple of hours away by train, and I was able to kind of often go up on a Friday after work and then come back sort of Sunday afternoon and spend a couple of days in the city and just eat, because Osaka's informally known as Japan's kitchen. So there's lots of different dining options, especially outdoor food, like from the hole-in-the-wall places, and the street food is exceptional there. Also, in terms of doing, for a first day, doing a traditional stay, then I'd really recommend including a ryokan, which is a traditional inn. And these are the inns where you would find onsen, or hot spring baths. And while Japan does so many things right, it doesn't have the most kind of ideal beaches to relax on. So if you're imagining sort of like a beach resort with a kind of white sands and somewhere to chill, Japan doesn't really have that. if you go to Japan or if you're Japanese and you want to relax and unwind, you would instead go to a ryokan and spend a few days wearing a yukata, which looks a bit like a lighter kimono, what you kind of wear when you're in the inn, and then just sort of bathing, eating nice food, staring out at the mountains. This is how you unwind. So actually including a stay there, and you can do that in a number of places within the country, especially in Honshu, and some of the kind of popular areas are Hakone, which is around the base of Mount Fuji, and somewhere actually that I got to stay a couple of months ago, which was Kinosaki Onsen, which is also kind of nicknamed the Venice of Japan, largely because of its canals. It's very different from Venice, but it's the canals that kind of give it that name. But Kinosaki Onsen is an actual onsen town, so there's lots of ryokans that you can stay in, but if you stay in one, then you're usually given like a bath ticket. Mm-hmm. So you can put on your yukata after dinner, take your ticket, and then visit the other hot springs in the area. So you see people walking around wearing their kind of geta, their sort of wooden clogs, and hearing the clip-clop as they walk down the street, doing bath hopping, essentially. And this is what I did. I went to, I think, about 3 different baths in one day, and I don't regret it for a second. I was incredibly relaxed after that. I mean, there's so much to see and do, so I'd recommend for a first-time visitor that exploring Honshu, and then also including places that kind of get you away from the larger cities wherever possible, and go to the smaller towns and smaller villages to really sort of highlight the difference between the two, because we wouldn't want anybody going to Japan to spend all of their time in a queue, especially when there's other places to explore to avoid those crowds.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the key points of kind of talking to travel experts, I think, is that they'll help you to avoid all those pitfalls and those holes.
Exactly.
Here's something just want to go back over it. Is as you're saying about Hiroshima. Mm. What's the kind of the attitude of the people locally then towards the Western world, kind of as a result of Hiroshima?
Largely, the kind of the spirit of the peace park as well. It feels that very much that there's no blame involved. It's very much the blame is against kind of atomic weaponry as a whole. So when you go in, then it will sort of give an overview of the situation and what happened and the lives lost during that incident. But there's no sort of finger pointing, and if you go and visit that area kind of coming from the West, then there's no sort of like negative kind of attitudes towards visitors or anything like that. It's very much sort of like it is created in the spirit of peace and to end atomic weaponry completely, and that's what the focus is. So I've been to the Peace Park a number of times, and it's incredibly moving, and it's a very different side of Japan that you'll see anywhere else. So it's it's sombering, I would say, but there's no sort of like laying blame against any particular nationality at all during that time, but kind of to go and pay respect to that area and then experience both the park and also the museum is a memory that I'll hold forever.
Yeah, interesting.
That's the end of the first part of our deep dive into Japan with Charlie Orr of Inside Japan. Make sure you like, follow and subscribe so you don't miss part 2 of the Jason Boull Travel Podcast,